they have their perception of what they think a person in this industry looks like, and it's not me. And as long as people have those perceptions, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Hi, I'm Grasie Mercedes, and welcome back to Not Blank Enough, a podcast about everyday insecurities and triumphs. Today, I'm chatting with creative consultant Nicolette Mason. She talks about growing up Persian-American in Los Angeles, how she overcame bias in the fashion industry, and her current commitment to living a life of joy. All this and more in this intimate conversation we titled Not Fashion Enough. Hi, Nicolette. Welcome to Not Blank Enough.
Hi, Gracie. It's so good to see your face.
I know. Same. I miss you. So for the show, I would love to start with just like your upbringing, where you're from. Tell me a little about your childhood and we'll get into it.
I grew up in Los Angeles, like part of LA proper, very much kind of like the Hollywood image that is portrayed. Like I really grew up in that.
Really?
Yeah. I grew up in a pocket of LA and went to school with like a lot of kids of like producers and directors and people who worked in entertainment or like entertainment lawyers and so on. And I feel like, even though I wasn't part of that world at all, like I definitely grew up around it and adjacent to it. I went to a Jewish school my whole life. My family is on my mom's side, Iranian. And so they had emigrated to LA in the early 80s. My parents met in London, and then moved here together. In retrospect, like a really strange place to grow up, but it's also the only thing I know.
Right.
I moved to New York from there when I was 18 years old. And I feel like New York is really what made me who I am now and has shaped a lot of me. But obviously, LA is such a big part of my identity and my upbringing, a place that I still really, really love.
Yeah, you're like a unicorn. I feel like when I grew up in New York and I always would get that, people are like, what do you mean you're from here? You're really from New York City? I'm like, yeah. But it's all I knew because I always get that too. Like,
Totally.
What was it like growing up in New York City? I'm like, I don't know. Like I was growing up anywhere.
Like normal for me.
Yeah, exactly. But the LA childhood seems interesting too, especially being around like so much entertainment and Hollywood and all that glitz and glamour. What was school like for you?
And it was school. Like I went to school. Let me rewind a little.
Yeah.
School was, I think, what school is for anyone. It's something that we have to do. I think I also really wanted to be well-liked throughout school, through like my whole upbringing, and always felt kind of like an outsider in different groups and different respects. So I just felt like I really didn't belong in like any group or niche or whatever it was. And I think like that's how a lot of people feel growing up, but something that I really, really internalized rather than like expressing it with other people. I was really focused on school. I really wanted to be a good student. That was definitely something was instilled in me too. And I think for anyone who grows up in an immigrant family, like the idea of working hard and having really strong work ethic, and you have to do well in school, and this is your opportunity, you have to reach your potential. Like that's so ingrained in us from a really, really young age.
Yep.
And like the things that we sacrifice to be here for you.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with so many guests because so many guests are the children of immigrants. It's crazy the pressure we put on ourselves, and we get, sometimes you get it from your family, but I feel like even if you don't get it from your family, like I didn't really get it from my mom, but I felt it. Like I was just like, ooh, yeah.
It doesn't even need to be said. Like that energy is there.
Yes.
That was something that like was instilled in me very, very early. And then once I got to high school, it was all about like the pressure to get into college and what does that look like, and doing all of the extracurriculars. And I did everything. Like I did journalism. So I was doing the school paper. I was a swimmer and played water polo and was a varsity athlete on those teams. And I was in all these clubs. And then I was doing like art classes at Otis College of Art and Design. And then I did a summer at Parsons. I was just like, it was all about building this perfect portfolio or resume when you're 16, 17 years old that is supposed to determine the path for the rest of your life. And like looking back, I'm like, God, I like put so much energy into these things that we really don't need to figure out when we're 17, 18 years old. And there's parts of me that like really feels like I missed out on just being a kid and being a teenager because I was really fixated on like wanting to be everything.
Yeah. In that period, what was the number one blank for you? Like, what did you feel like you were missing?
Ooh, honestly, everything. It's a little bit of everything. I think, especially being in a multicultural family, my mom is Iranian, my dad is English. LA has a very large Iranian and Persian population, and it's 250,000 people in LA alone. But I also look like this. And so from like a very, very young age, was very aware of the fact that I didn't look Persian and I didn't look Iranian. And other people said that to me constantly. And so when I went to school where it was a Jewish school, it wasn't very ethnically diverse, but the diversity that existed was like Persian Jews and Eastern European Jews and some kind of like other there. And I felt like I didn't really belong with anyone. And so when I was around Persian people, even like my own family, it was like, oh, this white girl, like that's how they talked about me.
Not Persian enough. Yeah, totally.
And then on the other side, people would be like, oh, you're so lucky that you don't look Persian.
Oh,
And
wow.
you're so lucky you don't look Middle Eastern. And I've really internalized that on all sides. And it's such a toxic thing to tell a child. And it really like instills this notion of, well, first of all, like white supremacy, 100%, but also that like, you shouldn't want to be that and you shouldn't want to identify with that. And that was really, really hard for me because I think I desperately wanted to like have an affirming experience with my cultural heritage and identity. And from all sides, I was being told I didn't really belong. It's a hard one because I feel like I wasn't blank enough in so many respects. So when I look at like the I'm not blank enough sentence, it's hard because it's everything. It's that culturally, I wasn't enough. I wasn't Persian enough. I wasn't thin enough. I was too loud. I was not studious enough. I was too studious. Like anything I can think of, like looking back at my upbringing, I always felt like I wasn't good enough at whatever it was, like all of it. And I've done a lot of therapy around that. So I'm okay with it now. I'm okay talking about that now.
Yeah.
You know, it didn't matter like what it was. It wasn't what I needed to be.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's such a universal feeling. It's literally everyone I talk to has this thing of not feeling like the thing they're supposed to be enough.
Right.
You know what I mean? And it's just, and it's so hard, especially when it comes from your own family or from the people close to you where you're like, oh my God, like if I can't feel like I fit in here, how am I going to feel like I fit in the world?
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I have a similar experience feeling like, you know, both my parents are Dominican, but I grew up, my mom was told not to teach me Spanish, so I didn't really speak Spanish. And then I looked the way I look. So people thought I was, you know, in New York, people knew that I was Dominican because there's so many Dominicans in New York, but out here in LA, no one knows anything about like Caribbean Latin people. And so there's always been that feeling like not Latin enough, not Black enough, definitely not white. It's interesting because I also think it's what makes us, it's kind of what develops personality in people. You know, these hardships kind of develop our personalities in a sense.
It's also like something that I'm so grateful for because I think it's made me incredibly sensitive to how multifaceted and multidimensional everybody is. Like what we see as someone's experience or what we might take for granted about the things that make people who they are, I feel like incredibly attuned to in a very special way. And I felt that early on too. I think like I became very conscious of that side of it late in my teen years. And then like, especially once I was like coming out and figuring out my sexuality and what is my identity in that way, it just made me have a real sense of appreciation for like all of the different things that make people who they are and what our identities are like. And I feel like I have a real genuine curiosity about that with other people. Like, I want to know who you are and all the things that make you who you are. And I think like that's one of the things we connected on too when we first met.
Yeah.
And you were telling me about growing up in New York and your Dominican heritage. I was like, yes, like I want to learn about people's cultures and backgrounds. It's so special to honor that.
And same, I remember, like, I'm sure most people being surprised that you were Persian. And I was like, tell me everything. And I feel like even moving to LA, I've met a lot of Iranian and Persian people that I've never interacted with in New York. I don't think the population there is very big, or at least I didn't encounter anyone from that background growing up. And so learning about that was always so interesting. Like just the different ethnicities you get to meet in LA versus New York, there's just like where people end up kind of thing. So you said you went to college, yes?
Yeah.
You went to what was your
design?
Oh, fun. What was your experience at Parsons?
It was really fun. I mean, so I came to New York first for a summer and I did like a pre-college program at Parsons School of Design. I remember like getting off this red-eye flight. I'm 17 years old. I arrived in New York. I can tell you the exact day, June 30th, 2003.
Wow.
And I know that because it was also the Sunday of Pride, for like LGBTQ Pride Month. I arrived at the dorm that I would be staying at and I was really early. And so I walked over to Fifth Avenue and like watched the beginning of the Pride Parade, especially as like a 17-year-old who, I grew up in LA, but I had a pretty sheltered upbringing in a very, very specific bubble of LA, seeing just like so many different kinds of people being who they were. It was just like this instant, like I felt like I was home. It wasn't just the place, New York City. It was all, wow, I'm getting really emotional in a way that I didn't expect.
Oh,
New York, I think, has this impact on a lot of people that it's not one of a city. It's like the impression that you get from a person where it feels like really affirming to be here for people. And that was definitely my experience. Like,
oh my God, now I'm emotional. I'm like, I miss home.
Did you think that you'd be like getting teary about New York City?
No. Oh my God. Right? Well, it really is such a special place. And like, being born and raised there, I went to college there. I didn't even leave for college. I always knew I wanted to go to NYU. And I was just like, I applied to like 3 schools because I was like, if I get an NYU, I'm going there.
Yeah.
And I didn't move to LA till I was like 27 almost. And I love LA. Yeah. And I will probably live in LA forever. But whenever I go home to New York, it's just like, I'm home. Like, it's just such a feeling of like, I'm where I belong. This is my home. Totally. This will forever be my home. But what you were saying about Pride specifically, it gave me such a flashback because I remember I was very young. I think my mom's 2 best friends were gay. Sadly, they died in the 80s AIDS crisis. My aunt had a lot of gay friends, LGBTQ friends, and she took me to my first Pride parade when I was like, I think maybe I was 10. I don't remember. I remember just being very young.
Yeah.
And seeing like, wow, like what is going on? Like as a kid, it's just the most like fun and joyous, like amazing parade ever, and colors and dancing. And I just remember thinking like, I knew in a sense, I like knew, I was like, this is different than like what I see normally, but but also being like, this is awesome. And not even knowing like what it was about, not knowing about sexuality, anything at that age, just thinking like, oh, this is awesome. And it's such a memory like ingrained in my brain. And now as an adult, I obviously know what I was experiencing. But I can picture that parade and like what an impact that would have on you, especially your first day. Yeah. And so you were out at that point or no?
I was not out. I was out to 2 of my closest best friends, but it was not something that I was like sharing with people necessarily, but it was still a really important and affirming experience because it was one of the first times I grew up like knowing gay people, like similar to you. When my parents moved to LA in the 80s, they were working in the design world, and my dad's like closest friends and colleagues were mostly gay men. And so that was like always something, I knew about,
Yeah.
knew existed. I always knew there were gay people, and it was never shunned in any way. Like my parents didn't try to hide that from me. Like they were very affirming and affectionate towards like the gay people in their life. So I'm really, really grateful for that. But no, as a 17-year-old, I was definitely like not out, not secure in my like sexuality or identity, but seeing that Pride Parade and then also like making close friends for the first time in my life who were openly gay. And a lot of the people who were in that pre-college program that was like an incredibly affirming experience because it just showed me that there was a possibility and an opportunity to like be who you are at a young age and like have people love you and accept you. And I didn't really come out until a few years later, but all of those like little moments were like exposure therapy for me.
Totally. Totally.
And then I got to this place where I was like, okay, I'm a lesbian. And I remember like telling my mom, and at the time she was like, are you sure? I think everyone thinks women are more beautiful. And I was like, well, it's not really what I mean. Thank you for that. New York is a very, very special place to me. And obviously not just for those reasons, but like, I feel really, really lucky and privileged to be able to have those experiences here and make it my home.
Yeah. Once you got into Parsons, what was life like in Parsons in New York City? And were there any feelings of not blank enough then?
Once I was in college, I was like, this is who I'm meant to be. And yes, for sure, there were a lot of feelings of not blank enough, a lot. But at first, it was just so exciting because I felt like I had room to self-express the way that I hadn't before. I had room to like dress how I wanted and do my hair, like things that are kind of superficial, but for a teenager or young adult, really, really important moments of self-discovery and self-expression. Sooner or later in college, I really wanted to work in fashion. And that was the moment where it was like, well, you know, you're not really going to fit into the fashion industry.
Yeah,
and
of course.
if you really want people to take you seriously in fashion, you're going to have to lose a lot of weight. And that was something that like I was told very explicitly. And I was like, okay, I either have to like lose a lot of weight, I guess. And I definitely tried many times. And I've had like negative experiences with like developing eating disorders and just putting an incredible amount of pressure on myself to look and be like something else. At the end of it, I was just like, I'm just not going to be in fashion. Like I don't belong there. And I also didn't really see a lot of people who looked like me working in fashion. I didn't see people who were plus size or fat. I didn't see people who were queer women. The few representations that I did see, I definitely didn't relate to. And so I was just like, okay, I'll cut my losses. Like, I guess I'm not going to have a future in the fashion industry.
So when you say you wanted to work in fashion, did you want to be a designer or did you want to be?
I wanted to work in editorial.
In editorial. And people were telling you to work in fashion editorial, you needed to lose weight. That seems crazy. Not seems crazy that I don't believe it. I totally believe it. But it's so absurd. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, there was not a conversation around body positivity. There was not a conversation around inclusion. The fashion industry still is, but especially in like the mid-aughts, 2008 was when I graduated, incredibly sizist and racist and ableist and all the things. And there was and is in a lot of parts of the industry a very small window and very small frame of reference for like what is fashionable and what is acceptable and what kind of image people are promoting. But yeah, I grew up wanting to work in editorial and like I told my mom like at a really young age, I was like, I want to be Anna Wintour when I grow up. I'm like, that's so embarrassing.
That's kind of incredible.
Precocious as a child to say that.
That you even know who Anna Wintour is as a child is incredible.
I think like part of it because I wasn't really interested in boys ever.
Right.
When my friends started like reading teeny bopper magazines, I was instead picking up like Vogue and Elle and Harper's. And like, those were the things that I was really interested in. And I was like plastering my walls with like fashion editorials and magazine spreads. And so, yeah, I was really, really interested in that. And I studied the business side of fashion in school. And for my thesis, I like made a queer fashion magazine. So
cool.
I like really wanted to work in editorial and fashion. And yeah, and I didn't pursue it. As you now know, I ended up working in that field and I have very much ended up working in that industry. But it took being told that I couldn't and that I wouldn't, and that I didn't have a future in it, pursuing a different career in branding. And while I was there, I started my blog just to like have my own little inspiration. And again, it was 2008. I was working full time. I was doing my little blog on the side. Within a couple of years of that, I was being asked to write for editorial magazines about plus size fashion and body positivity, all these conversations that now are like kind of requisite for a lot of editorial publications. Like they have to do this now.
Yeah.
At the time it didn't exist. And so Gabby Fresh, who you know very well as well and has been on the podcast.
Yes.
She was someone who I connected with. We really rooted each other on in a major way. And also she really encouraged me to keep pursuing it and then share my outfits and things that like, who cares about my outfits? But,
that's how I was in the beginning too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's taken a lot of like twists and turns to get here, but I've ended up having like a little bit of the editorial career that I dreamed of having, but never actually thought was possible.
That's so cool. I actually got chills when you said that because it's like, yeah, you're being told you're not thin enough or not fashionable enough or not whatever. You don't fit into this world. And then you give it up and then you start pursuing something you actually want to pursue or do something you want to do. And then they come to you, which I feel like happens so much in the arts anyway. It's like we as artists strive for whatever we think is the thing we want to do. And we get sometimes, beat up or told no again and again until we're like, fuck this. I'm not waiting for permission to do what I want to do.
Totally.
And then you do it and then people come to you. And it's like, it's the number one thing I tell people all the time when they ask me about like writing or acting. I'm like, just do it. Just do it. Yeah.
I mean, I think there are some things and talents and skills that can be cultivated for sure. But I also think there are some paths that are just innate to certain people and certain callings that are for them for whatever reason. Like part of what I was supposed to do with my career and with my life is to like speak about a lot of experiences that people have in terms of body, relate that to fashion and create paths for other people to be able to see themselves in this industry. And, that's been through editorial work. It's been through my consulting work and working with brands on developing their plus size brands and size extensions. Gabby and I launched our own brand together. And that was such a cool experience because we really were able to control and create every single touch point of the brand, from the casting to the actual design of the clothing, to the size run, to being able to use e-com models that weren't a size 12, which is what like every other plus size brand was doing. Like, wow, we could actually show models who are our breadth of the size run and prove that that works.
Yeah.
It's very surreal to look back on all of it and like realize like, this is actually what I was always meant to do. It just had to happen in this nonlinear roundabout way.
Yeah. And I think to what you were saying, I think when people have these passions and these gifts, they're not going to let no stop them. And that's why things eventually happen for them. Whereas some people think they might want to do certain things, but once they're told no a certain amount of times, will give up, which is fine. Maybe they'll find something else that they love. But it's the people that are like, nah, I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to be stopped. Yeah.
And something I think about a lot too is like for all of us who were not blank enough and whatever that is, I think there's like a want to be invited to a party. And it's like, we're just going to throw our own fucking party.
Yeah.
And we're going to invite our friends and we're going to make the guest list bigger. And then you're going to want to come to our party.
I love that. I love that so much.
I think that's a lot of what has happened in the entertainment industry, in fashion, in these cultures that have been like very exclusive and built on leaving people out. No, now they all want to come to our party. And that's a really, really cool thing. And it's also, I think, a step further. It's not just about being included. It's like, how do we dismantle the systems that kept people out and make sure that there are pathways for other people in? I think that's what a lot of the conversations that we're having now in these different industries look like. And it makes me very hopeful. I'm not naive about it.
Yeah.
Like, the power structures are what they are, but it makes me hopeful that there can actually be really long lasting change too.
Yeah, absolutely. That does feel like things are actually shifting.
Yeah.
Which is definitely time and exciting. So today in 2021, what is Nicolette up to and what's going on with work and life, and how are you feeling now?
Work and life. This last year has been so hard for everyone. And I don't want to like overstate something that everyone is saying, but I think it really has put so much in perspective about how we devote our time, how we devote our energy, what kind of people do we want to be on a day-to-day basis. It really has made me very reflective about the life that I want to live, not with respect to my professional life, just like my personal life, my family.
Yeah.
The things that make me happy waking up in the morning and make me feel fulfilled when I go to sleep. I feel really, really focused right now on cultivating joy. And what does that look like in my day-to-day life?
Love it.
Creating just more moments of joy. And I think I've always aspired to be someone who like romanticizes all parts of their life. And I'm really manifesting that right now. Like all of it. Like I'm just romanticizing all of it. And that makes me happy. So that's a big part of it. But then career-wise, professionally, I am working on launching a podcast.
Yeah.
A wonderful, wonderful friend of mine who you may be familiar with. It's going to be launching later this spring. I'm also still consulting. So I'm working with some dream brands and clients on creating really inclusive, like genuinely inclusive and community born and driven initiatives. They're in the beauty industry, they're in the fashion industry, and they're the kind of projects that just really make me feel incredibly fulfilled and happy. And it's not about me being front and center in it. It's about elevating different stories and narratives. Like we said in the beginning, like what are the things that make people who they are, and being able to spotlight all of those experiences and things that make people really special. It's interesting because so much of my life is like front facing influencer, content creator, but like nobody sees that side of me.
Right.
Definitely one of the parts that feels the best for me on a personal level.
Yeah. And today, is there any blank that is still prevalent, or one that's new, or one that you're still like kind of struggling with?
I do still struggle with it. I'm not going to lie. I definitely still struggle with the idea that I don't belong in fashion still, even though now I've worked in this industry for over 12 years.
Yeah.
And definitely have objectively, like I've had a really solid career so far. I think there's still a long way for me to go, but I definitely have these moments of imposter syndrome still that tell me I don't belong and I'm not good enough. And
we all do. Yeah.
I'll never be able to work with XYZ brand. And that's something that I still hear in terms of luxury brands. And I kind of made this like wish list vision board of brands that I really want to work with someday. And I still get that like, babe, it's not going to happen. And I'm like, but what if it does?
Exactly. We all have that imposter syndrome. I mean,
totally.
It's the worst. But I think it also is what keeps people going in a sense,
Yeah.
So maybe not fashion enough. That's kind of a cool one.
Right? Yeah. Still not fashion enough, not aspirational enough.
Not
That's when I hear a lot.
Oh, Jesus. Ick. Yuck.
Right? What does that even mean?
What does that even mean?
I mean, I'm definitely living a life that I would have aspired to if I even knew it was possible.
Right.
What do you really mean when you're telling me I'm not aspirational enough. It comes back to thin. That's really sad. So I think I still have a lot of work to do dismantling that and not internalizing it.
If we had to name the episode, would you want it to be not aspirational enough, or is there something else that feels more overarching in the life of Nicolette?
I feel like right now it's the not fashion enough. It's definitely been like a common thread since I was in college, definitely. And yet I have a list of 30 plus incredible fashion clients that I've had over the years, plus many publications and editorial magazines.
Isn't that amazing though? That's what we do to ourselves. That's like what we do to ourselves.
Literally.
But on the flip side, it's like you have that, like you have this success and you are working and you are doing exactly what you wanted to do. It's so interesting. Like you are told not fashion enough, right? Your whole life or since college, yet here you are. It's like a big, fuck you to everyone who's ever thought that or said that.
Oh, really? Watch.
Really? Would you like to see my client list?
No, you just reminded me of another memory that I go back to a lot, which was being at Fashion Week in New York. And I was seated front row at a show and I went to take my seat and a PR assistant came up to me and they're like, "You're not in the right seat." I was God. "Yeah, I am." Like, "What are you talking about?" She was like, "Well, let me see your ticket." And I showed her my ticket and she was like, "Well, who gave this to you?" I'm like, "This is my name. This is me." I'm like, "Why do you think I don't belong in this seat?"
Exactly.
Is actually the question that I have for you. Yeah. It's just something that always sticks out to me when I think about it. I'm like, they have their perception of what they think a person in this industry looks like. And it's not me. And as long as people have those perceptions and have those assumptions, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, I love that. That story is actually pretty perfect. I mean, it's yeah, of course that happened. Oh, but to end on a high note, because this is so lovely. I just want to say, I love you. I think you're incredible.
Oh, thank
your
you.
Instagram and everyone should follow you. It's at Nicolette Mason, right? On Instagram. So we can learn about when the podcast launch happens.
Yeah.
And is there anything else we should know about?
Live life. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at right now. Let's cultivate good memories and have fun.
I feel you, especially after the year we had. You only get one life. Let's live it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nicolette. This was lovely. Thank you for listening to Not Blank Enough with me, Grasie Mercedes. You can find out more about today's guest in the show notes. Please subscribe to Not Blank Enough wherever you get your podcasts and follow us on Instagram at Not Blank Enough Pod. Also, if you like what you hear, please consider a rate and review. Our show today was executive produced by Grasie Mercedes and Dave Hill and produced by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Not Blank Enough is a Gumption Pictures production.